Everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Network. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I'm your host. Today's guest is Lauren Jensen, who's a mechanical engineer. And we met on LinkedIn and we started having a conversation. And Lauren, thank you for joining me on the show because I think what you've been doing on LinkedIn has been creating some interesting controversy about STEM. But first, give us a little introduction in your background.
Sure. I started out working with my father. He worked in a machine shop that he didn't own the machine shop, but he was the guy in charge that ran the machine shop. It was a diamond firm in Provo, Utah. It was run by Dave Hall. He was actually the son of Tracy Hall, who was the inventor of the diamond press. And so I helped make a lot of the parts, some of the parts for the diamond press. Um, like when I first started working there, I was only 14, so I was kind of like a dual role. I started as kind of a janitor slash machinist, but because of my father's the connection I had with my father, I had some pretty good experience, and so I have about 5 years of actual hands-on machining experience. That was probably better than what most people in the machining industry would ever be able to have. I did more than just push buttons. I did some manual lathes, I did some mill work, learned how to program. I still remember some of the G codes by memory. Um, so I could program the G code. I also learned some of the stuff like Gibbs, so I could do some programming like that. So I did that for about 5 years. There was a break in between. Um, but because of my exposure, my dad always wanted to be a mechanical engineer, so I kind of followed in his footsteps. He never became a mechanical engineer. He got kind of stuck in machining, but he was a fantastic machinist. He was very well known in the area and always in high demand, always employed. Um, and so because of that, I was always exposed to a lot of engineering. And so for me, also a lot of engineering was also kind of more like in the heavy industry, because kind of the stuff that Dave Hall worked on, in addition to diamond presses, he also worked on like a drilling pipe. It was a smart drilling pipe. The stuff that I'm familiar with working on was really more like stuff you'd see in more heavy industry. I think the press probably, it was as tall as, I don't know, it was probably like 10 feet tall, and it was like solid metal.
Oh, wow.
And then, even some of the machines they used later on in his other company, IntelliServe, um, some of the lathes were as large as some rooms. So I enjoyed machining, but I wanted to go ahead and actually get my engineering degree. So I did get my engineering degree at the University of Utah, um, in the undergraduate degree. And then at the time when I graduated, I kind of had a hard time finding the right job. And I actually ended up working as a software developer most of my career. I always had a lot of skill when it came to software development. I taught myself how to program when I was a teenager. I also, like in the projects and stuff, in my undergraduate course, like when there was a project, I usually was the one that handled all the coding. I also did a lot of the manufacturing too because of my experience as a machinist. So I have a lot of hands-on skills that a lot of like engineers don't have. Um, but yeah, so I've done machining. I got a degree in mechanical engineering, and I worked in. Once I graduated, I actually worked in banking systems, and I did banking systems programming on an IBM and I did that for almost 10 years. And
Wow.
then that's where I am. I end up leaving that job. It was a good job. If you want a real stable job, a lot of times you can work in the financial sector, especially with banking. Um, and so I left. Um, I got another job. I left that job because I really wanted to do some of my own stuff. Um, and so that's kind of where I
Yeah.
am right now. I feel like for the next stage for me as a human being to progress, I feel like I want to develop my entrepreneurial side,
Yeah.
because I already have the technical side down. I know I kind of suck as an entrepreneur, but I feel like if I could learn to be more of an entrepreneur, that would kind of take me to the next level of being able to contribute and kind of be what I feel as really taking advantage of the American experience. Because if you're just working for someone else, you're kind of a slave until you're able to get your own thing going. You're not really a free man. And my middle name's Freeman, so I figure I need to make sure that someday I can actually say I'm free, about as free as you can, anyways, in this life. And so that's kind of where I am right now. I'm working on my own little project that I'm hoping to bring to market, and it's not really a real high tech project because I didn't want it to be, mainly because I don't want to focus on the technology right now. I want to focus on the business side of it. Because one of
Yeah.
the problems with a lot of engineers when they get into something where they want to develop a project, they can get stuck just programming and coding. and they can think that that is what business is, developing the product, and that's actually a very, very, very small part of the business, which I
Yeah.
understand. And that's I already got the technical side down. Someday, I could probably, if I do well, I can hire people for that.
Yeah.
But like Dave Hall, actually, he was actually a mechanical engineer too, and then he went and got a degree in business.
Lauren, hold
And
on one
so,
second. That's Lauren.
yeah,
I don't
sorry,
mean to slow you down, slow you down there, man. I love this. This is good. I'm getting
I'm
chills because
rambling.
you're
Sorry.
no, no, no. You're not. You're doing a great job with the introduction. You gave a great foundation of your experience, and I think that's very valuable to
Okay.
a lot of people that are listening to get a good
Yeah.
foundation of like you, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
anybody can like see a post on social media, anybody can see, things that are written, and they really don't get a good comprehension of the person. And I
Correct.
think you just laid a great foundation. Now, I want to go back though before we get into Dave
Yeah.
Hall and that experience there. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned a lot about your degree in mechanical engineering, and then
Yeah.
you're a software developer. What made you want to be a software developer?
I don't know. I think I've always had this. I think when I was younger, I always liked the challenge, and
Yeah,
I always wanted to feel like I could understand how computers work. And so I learned back in the day. The first language I think I learned was Perl. I don't think I remember any of it anymore because it hasn't been used in a long time. I remember. I think one of the first things I wrote was like a spell checker in Perl, which is pretty easy because it uses regular expressions. Um, but yeah, I just always pictured myself creating things when I was younger. I always like when I was younger, I used to be like, oh, I want to build a submarine someday when I get older. I want to like a small one. I want to
yeah,
just build stuff. I think after machining for a while, one of the things I really wanted to do was I wanted to make my own CNC machines, and I wanted to also be able to make the controls too. And in fact, I actually started making some controls shortly after I graduated and writing the software from scratch to handle like the interpolation of the G code and to handle like the circles and stuff and to get the servos to move at the same time. I kind of got busy and kind of never really finished it, but I got to the point where it could interpolate like a G1 and see, was it like a G2 or G3 for the
yeah,
circles? It was doing that just fine. So I just think, like a lot of engineers, I just think I like to build things. And one more thing too, I would say I always thought when I was younger, because I kind of came from a religious background. I always felt like that we could solve a lot of the world's problems with technology. I
yeah,
thought, we could solve poverty with technology. We could solve, you name it. We could fix it with just inventing something. I don't feel that way anymore.
mm,
That's one of the reasons. One of my turns on STEM is I actually don't feel that technology solves problems anymore. I think technology, if we're not prepared to deal with it and have the moral backing separate from it, it actually enhances our vices. And I think you can see that with like social media. I think I remember in the 90s, I don't know how old you are. You look like a pretty young guy, but I was in school in the 90s and we were always promised this world, we're going to be connected. You're going to talk to someone in China and, the world's going to be great. There's going to be world peace and everything. Well, that didn't really work. And you can see with all this technology, and I would especially say with like internet and social media, that people are more disconnected, they're more lonely, they're less likely to form families, they're more likely to cheat on their spouse. So I would actually say my mind about technology solving the problems that really matter for us has changed, and I think technology is actually magnifying our problems and making them worse. And I think a lot of people make fun of like what was it? Someone on one of my posts said, "Well, maybe you should get a, degree in political science." And my response to that is, well, if it wasn't for political science with like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, you wouldn't have a society where you could do right now what you want to do with technology. You know what I'm
there you
saying?
go.
And with how political science has progressed over time, it's made society uh, be in a position where people could do that. But otherwise, without good political science, we'd just be living in the dark ages. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of times. So, anyways, I can get on tangents, but I would say that
Well,
overall, when I was
that
younger, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, no, no, no. This is good. Look, I think that it's very important to understand your
Yeah,
um, when it comes to software development and like the background and experience and where your mind is. You mentioned technology being like a tool that could solve the world problems. Well, we know that that's not the case anymore. You just kind of said there's a lot of division and
Yeah. Yeah.
social separation. There's all those things that are happening now that we're starting to realize. Mental health issues are becoming on a skyrocket. There's all these things that humans are now, as they interact with technology, are getting absorbed into it, so to speak, and kind of an
Yep.
addiction and certain aspects of it. You really start to think about it. So you're pointing out a lot of good things. You talk about you know religion and certain aspects of it, and I'm not sure where you kind of in your history, like how you think about things, but it can be used for good and evil. It's kind of the way I think about it,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
technology, if it's in the wrong hands, you create an algorithm that can just be disruptive. You can do a lot of damage, right? Same thing as on the good side. You can really provide a lot of value, maybe educate, reskill workers. There's all kinds of good and bad to everything we have in our life. But it's just a matter of how do we regulate it? And that political science thing you're talking about, how do we
Yeah.
govern it? How do we, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a whole thing. So anyway,
Yep.
um, this is very, very, really intriguing, man, because as you were talking about freedom and entrepreneurship, which we're going to get into in a little bit, um, I wanted to know a little bit more about you're talking about entrepreneurship and you're wanting to get into it,
Yeah.
and you built some tech already or had some concepts and things like that you've designed.
Correct.
Um, what do you when you said you want freedom? Explain a little bit more about freedom. Now, I get entrepreneurship, but what do you mean? What do you feel right now about freedom? Like, you don't think it's really there? Because you mentioned about like working for someone. Like, you and I have the same opinion, by the way. Working for someone
Yeah.
else,
Yeah.
I figure you're just a slave. Like, I hate to say it that way, but you're making other people rich. I've always looked at it that way too. So go ahead.
Well, not only are you making other people rich, a lot of times you don't have control over what you're doing. You don't have control who you work with, and you don't have control of the projects you're working on. And so, in that way, not just as far as financially, but just what you do and during your day is a place where you're lacking some freedom. And when you think of the founding fathers, most of the founding fathers in the U.S., I realize now because I've been talking with a lot of people on LinkedIn, they want me to specify the country because LinkedIn's more global. But I feel like if that to some degree, the founding fathers were a good example of people who kind of got their own personal lives in a place where they were living as free as they possibly could, and so they were kind of independent, and but they owned their own businesses. They decided what they were going to work on. I kind of want to be there someday,
Yeah,
hopefully sooner than later. So I feel
yeah,
like the thing keeping me from doing that is my lack of business skills, and I'm like I said, I'm going into it realizing I suck at it, but I'm hoping that as I go out and talk to people and try to, once I get my product developed and try to get them to carry it like in their stores, that I can develop those skills and be kind of more like the founding fathers rather than just some geek behind a computer writing code.
yeah. Look, it's the American dream, man. Entrepreneurship's
Yeah,
there. It gives you an opportunity to build something from scratch and hope people want to buy it, and then you can offer something of
yep,
value, right? That's the
yep,
entrepreneurship way. Build something that people want and then provide the value. So I've been in this world. That's been my life. Entrepreneurship, I love it. I've never
yep,
I've stuck with companies and built territories and built relationships and things like that, and I'm always like, all the money went to them, but I'm like, well, I built most of it. Like, you think about the backs of the workers and stuff like that. I'm like, we only give them a percentage. We give them a salary. We've been taught education, our education system by the Rockefeller.
yep,
And like, I'm not going to go deep into this thing, but you think about the way it was taught back in the day, and they still kind of use it as a mechanism to control the education so that you work for other people. You're taught to all work for other people versus like, let's teach you about the dollar, how to financially invest it correctly, how to invest
you're right.
into yourself, how to educate yourself. So, can you elaborate a little bit more on that as I kind of went down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting because you kind of mentioned Rockefeller.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times it's important for us, wherever we are, to look at where we're at and ask ourselves, is this the only way it can be? I think a lot of times we get a certain way of where we get absorbed into our culture and we say, well, okay, well, it's the way it's always been, so that's the way it must always be. And we have to look back and say, well, why do we do things the way we do things? Why do we have this way of, you go to school for a certain number of years? Okay, I have an interesting point I want to make. Like, have you ever seen like those? You ever been watching TV and you've seen like a special? I actually don't watch TV. I haven't watched it in a long time. But I remember you see like this young kid who became a doctor at like 13. And everyone's like, oh, wow, this kid's so smart. Oh, wow, this is amazing. Oh, you have so much to offer. And I'm like, you dummies, you're all asking the wrong questions. How did this kid get up having to go through all the grades? How did he, there's a shortcut he took because even if you took a kid in the wrong family and he's a genius, they still say, okay, well, now you're in first grade. Well, now you're in second grade. Now you're in third grade. They're asking the wrong questions. There's a
Yeah.
loophole where that kid didn't have to go through all the grades, whether he was or was not a genius. And you should be asking, why was he allowed to skip those grades, even if he is a genius? And you should be asking, well, maybe I should find a way to get my kids to do the same thing. If that makes sense.
That's it right there, man. That's so true. You think about it, like there's loopholes in a
Yeah.
lot of things in our system. There's systems that
Yeah.
are created by the government, and then there's so many different ways you can figure your way through it, right? And that's a perfect example. Like if that kid can do it, anyone can do it. Like literally anybody wants to have the initiative and the passion to do it will do it. And a kid that starts early and does all the education processes faster or is
Yeah.
presented with the opportunity to do it quicker, right, without the
Yeah.
public system controlling and stalling and delaying and that whole process that I've gone through. It's really, the system is broken. I mean, the education system, we all kind of know this, right? So anyway, you want to talk?
Well, I actually think the education system is really more for indoctrination. We got to get the kids away from their parents as much as we can during the day. And I think that's what
Yeah.
it's really about. Because that 13-year
Okay.
old who became a doctor, he didn't do it. And like I said, it's not just about being smart. It's someone let him get into college without having those the high school diploma. So our
Yeah.
system is. I think as a lot of our industries, they're interested on setting obstacles to people entering them. But if
Yeah.
you're in the in crowd or you have the connections, you know the right people, you can get in without having to go through the obstacles that are set for the average Joe.
It's wild, man. You can be an MBA,
Yeah,
get a degree, become a CEO.
yeah,
I'm like, wait, have you ever actually built a company or understood all the bottom up,
yeah.
operation processes of the actual company? But they make him CEO, and I'm like, wait, he doesn't even understand how it works, like in the field, like how the operations actually work. And you just
It's,
created somebody. It's wild.
I have some good analogies there if you want to talk about CEOs. I
Hey,
would
man, we
say
got time.
there's kind of like two types of CEOs, right? You have like the Steve Jobs. Sorry, I get it because it's Job. I get the guy. I sometimes I say it like the Bible Job, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have like the regular CEO who kind of inherits the position because of connection, and they're not the same thing. And I think the most
Mhm.
important thing is if you're a CEO and you get into a company, you have to understand there are CEOs who make something happen from nothing, and then there are the CEOs who's friends with the board and he gets put us in charge. But you're not a Steve Jobs. And the best
Right.
thing you can do if you have that type of CEO is to recognize that don't try to be a Steve Jobs because you're not. Build it. You inherited it. A CEO who inherits a company is way different than a CEO who builds one. Now, there's a place for CEOs who inherit a company because sometimes you need that kind of more conservative, sometimes it's time to tamper it down so it can be more long term. But the thing that's really annoying is when you get a CEO where they think they're the next Steve Jobs, and it's like Jobs. Sorry. And it's like there's very few Steve Jobs, and it's okay that you're not a Steve Jobs, but don't try to be a Steve Jobs because if you try to be a Steve Jobs and you're not, you're probably going to wreck the company.
Yeah, it's amazing because I looked at I was looking at jobs on LinkedIn and I was like, man, I wonder what these people are requiring. And I thought that the
Yeah.
system was flipping, right? It was going back to like experience is more powerful than just having a degree, right? And I'm not against degrees or
Oh,
anything
oh
like
yeah.
that, but I'm seeing these applications that will apply, right? I go click it and I'm like, oh, they want a degree, they want a degree, they want a degree. I'm like, wouldn't they rather have someone that actually has the experience rather than the degree? Like, I don't understand.
I agree with you that with both business leaders and salesmen. Okay, like
Okay.
entrepreneurship. Let's start with salesmen because I think it's an easier example to look at. Like at the last one of the last places I worked when I worked in banking, there was an excellent salesman there in the next office. We had one before who didn't really sell anything, and then we got this guy, and he was just always on the phone. And he didn't it didn't bother him talking to people all day long. And I'm like, yeah, that this is a salesman. Um, you can't go to school and learn how to become a salesman. It's not salesman is you got to get out there and put yourself out of your comfort zone You've got to be willing to make those phone calls. You've got to be willing to deal with some uncomfortable situations and enjoy it. And it's like, I think salesmen are kind of like, you either are one or you're not. It's kind of hard to become one. So I'm going to try to a certain degree. But it's like, you don't learn that in school. And the same thing with entrepreneurship to a large degree. I feel like either you're the guy who can go out there, you're starting a business when you're younger, you know how to do the hustle, or you're not. You don't go to like being an entrepreneur is not about just knowing the laws. It's about
Yeah.
actually getting it out there, meeting people, making the connections.
Right.
And in some ways, I would think going to school and you're kind of in an introverted environment where you're studying can actually kind of give you kind of a misconception that that's what business is, and it's not. It's a people thing. Now it can definitely help you if you already understand the other part of business. Having those technical skills can help you in the business knowledge, but it is no substitute for the actual real skills, which honestly you don't need to go to school to get, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100% right. And that, I guess that's what I've seen is like there's still a requirement like for a marketing person or a person with
Yeah,
business revenue to generate like a revenue, like a chief revenue officer is one of the new titles I see recently, right? But
never
they
heard
want
that one.
An MBA
Yeah,
degree. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I wonder how much they have actually built companies and actually done sales of like being creative, and which you kind of mentioned. It's like business development sales is a place where it is ruthless. It is difficult at first until you become creative enough to understand all the loopholes. Again, there's loopholes of like how
yeah,
you can do sales and like understanding how to get around them and to provide. My experience is it's always about value, right? Can you build trust? Can you build credibility? I'll tee it up. So, Lauren, I want to go back to like talking about the like, STEM because we're running out of time, and give
yes.
us a little overview of like your post and where this all started, and you know, give everyone kind of an understanding where your mind is and why you created it. The STEM post.
Yes. I think the thing about it is, I think people are misunderstanding a lot of things I'm saying. I like, even though obviously you can talking to me, you can tell I'm in STEM, and I enjoy it to a certain degree. Um, I've been in the CS industry, sorry, the CS field specifically has been really hit hard with the AI. Um, and AI is making it harder for people to get jobs and other things in the industry as well. And I can just say I'm in contact with people in the CS industry, and they're not getting jobs. It's taken them a very long time to get jobs, and people entering that are new into the field aren't getting jobs at all. I talked to one guy who graduated from Brigham Young University, which is actually a pretty decent college, and he went 2 years without getting a job, and he still doesn't have one. And
Mm,
so a lot of these this society is trying to continue to push people towards these STEM fields, and like I said, I'm trying to specify that they're non-medical STEM. A lot of people just they can't get the idea that I'm saying, okay, I understand medical is part of STEM, but I want, for the purposes of my discussion, I want to exclude them because I don't consider them part of the same ecosystem. Like their field's doing just fine. But when I think of
yeah,
STEM, I usually think of people that would go to like a tech convention or something. And I don't usually see a lot of doctors there. Granted, I don't really go to them that often, but I just don't
right.
see it as a place where they're talking about the latest surgery. And so, yeah, technically, yeah, it's STEM, but I want to refer to non-medical STEM because I still think if you can actually get into the medical field, you'll do just fine. But
Yeah,
so you have all these people getting these degrees, and here's the thing: even if it was still a good field to work in and with tons of jobs, I still wouldn't recommend getting a degree in computer science specifically. Um, because like I said, they're all unemployed. Yet you have all these people. Like most of the people going into STEM are going into computer science, and they're coming out and they're not going to get jobs. And I
yep.
don't think you're doing them a service in their life by telling them that this is a bright future when it's not. You're hurting these people, like, because these are hard degrees, and so they're going to devote all this time in this degree, and then they're going to have the heartache and heartbreak of coming out into a field that no one wants to hire them. Some of them are going to be very depressed. And I just want to encourage people, before you go into STEM, consider the field, consider the reality of the world we live in, and also realize that STEM's not for everyone, because there's some things in STEM where a lot of people don't have the personality for it. And there's a lot of hard personalities to deal with in STEM. Can you deal with people who have autism as your coworker? You know what I'm saying? And I
Yeah.
can because I get along with them really well. And I'm not knocking autism. Some of my favorite people are autistic, but I found that I was the person who could deal with those people. That other people just said, let's just can him, let's just get rid of him or something. I'm like, no, he has a lot to offer. Just because you don't know how to use them doesn't mean. But I'm saying, but a lot of people just, in my opinion, I don't think are cut out for STEM. Now, when it comes to some of the other engineering fields, I believe you still have some time before AI um, creates a problem there. But I still believe, even in the other technology fields, I think AI is eventually going to become a problem for all of them. It's just hitting computer science first. And so I think a lot of people would be better served if they were to look at their options in fields that I think they'd have a better outlook for employment, even if it's not as high paying. Does that make sense?
You're
Does that help?
No, I know, and I'm going to add on to it because of my
Yeah,
personal experience with building technology myself. After I left my last startup, we were using pivot tables and stuff like that, and I was like, "Why aren't we building
yeah,
software to do this?" Back in 2016, 17,
okay,
and we were using pivot tables. I was like, "This makes no sense. We can start. We should be building a software." We didn't do that, but then I was like to myself, I was like, "I need to understand software, how to build software, and
yeah,
then how to build technology from." Because I saw how the industry, especially civil infrastructure, is moving in water, sewer, all this industry is transforming now. And then AI came along in 2019, 2020. Well, no, it was about 2023. 2023, where this everything AI started talking, having coming around. And I'm like thinking to myself, holy
yeah,
crap, this thing, I'm using it. And I'm like, if this is the future, like I don't need to focus on building and writing code anymore because I started to see and started testing it out and it was writing code for me. And I was like, well, right there. I mean, all I have to do is prompt the system correctly.
yeah,
Once you learn how to prompt correctly, then you can get your output, which is the obviously the code that you want. But it wasn't really good. And I can tell you over the last year, year and a half of using GPT, stuff like that, and it's no everyone's kind of understands it, they get it, but you can really start to see how good it's starting to get now. It's really starting to get much more efficient and it's more
yep,
stable. And then as you use GitHub and as you use different platforms to post your code,
yep,
you can really speed up the process now. And before I end, now you're starting to see where they're plugging an AI into software development. You're starting to see where they're
yeah,
plugging into platforms for no code tooling, where you don't
yeah.
it'll do it automatically if you prompt it correctly, and it's kind of the future. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was done with my banking job after about a little over 9 years, and I wanted to try something different. And so I left the company on my own terms. And I ended up getting a job like 2 weeks later at a place down in Orem, and they were doing some embedded programming. But I didn't really enjoy that company, and it only took me 2 weeks to find that job. And so I left it, and I was kind of like, I'll just find another job in 2 weeks. And then like right at that time, AI, the big what was it, four came out, and it became a huge thing. And and I just thought, because it was so easy to get a job from there to there, that it was just going to always be that way. And then and then I looked at the code and ran it and had it write some code for me, and I'm like, I'm done because I'm not going to try to compete in this industry. And as it became harder and harder to get jobs in that industry, I was like, people are talking about sending out like 1,000, 2,000 applications. I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time doing that. I'd rather take that time and build a business because
Yeah.
because because if I'm going to take that time to do 1,000 or 2,000 applications, I wouldn't waste my time. I'm like, that tells you that's a bad sign in that industry. And if you're going to spend that time, what else could you have done at that time? And I understand that some people, maybe some people it's their dream, and they're not thinking about the cost. But I remember seeing someone saying it took like 1,000 hours to get a job. That's a huge investment.
Wow.
It's like, is it really? And now, this is CS, okay, computer science. Computer science, like I said, really has been hit the hardest. I think it's time to evaluate and say, there will always be people in computer science for sure, but they're going to be the people who kind of probably started sooner, because they're going to be the ones that, because I use ChatGPT to write code, but I can take the code and I can go like, no, you messed up there, because I know enough about coding where I know where I can use it and where I can't use it, and I can also take the pieces and put it together. And if it messes up on something, I can go through and figure out where it messed up.
Yeah.
So there's always been people that need that. But in order to get to that level, I mean, you've got to work in the industry for about at least 5 years before you're able to be at that at least a mid or senior level. I'm a senior level, um, but with someone who goes out of college, they're not going to be able to compete with that. They're not going to be able to add value because they're probably kind of more at the Chat GPT level themselves. And so
Yeah.
that huge step from the time you graduate to actually being useful in a world that's leveraging AI, I'm telling you, a lot of people are doing their kids the disservice by encouraging them to go into CS specifically.
Yeah.
Um, but there, I even saw an article recently. Now they had mechanical engineers who were leveraging AI to help design an engine, a jet engine, uh, probably like a ramjet engine. Um,
Yeah.
so it's even entering there. So yeah, you saw that the AI is becoming so powerful. I saw it, and I'm like, this field's over for me.
Yeah.
And it's like either I can accept it now, and I told myself I can accept it now and do what I can, so I can be in a better position down the road. I want to be in a good position with the way the world's going, and not necessarily be caught, say 55 or 60, losing my job, and then not be able to find anything because honestly, in computer science, there's an enormous amount of age discrimination. And so once you get to a certain age, if you can't keep your job, you lose it. You might have a hard time finding another job. And
Oh,
that's
this
another thing people should, yeah, that's another thing people should that people if people want to continue down the road in computer science, fine, but they need someone, and this is going back to my post, to show them some of the negatives so they can have a balanced debate, because they're not getting a balanced debate on this. They're not getting both points of view. They're just hearing, yeah, STEM's the future, STEM's great, STEM solves all our problems, you'll have a bright future in STEM. Well, there might be some things you should consider. I'm not a prophet, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there needs to be someone saying, you know what, this really sucks about STEM. If you're considering going into it, you should think about this. Like for example, programming used to be a lot funner before they started doing a lot of like the Scrum stuff. But it's a grind now. It's not as fun as it used to be, say, even 10 years ago. The industry has become so they have their finger on you so much now that it's some of these shops are just miserable to work in. You know,
Oh, I'm sure.
like the
Yeah.
the the, the place. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say because I can monitor your sprints now. I know how much production you're doing. It's not
Yeah,
freedom. You don't have freedom to be a developer and
no.
freedom to create anymore. It's like I need you to get this done. Here's the sprints. I need you to execute that, and that's it. Like you meet your quota, and that's kind of the path I've
and,
seen.
and and I understand why they kind of went that direction to a certain degree, because it's kind of hard to monitor the productivity of programs. It really is. But it also creates an environment where it burns out programmers. I'm more of a fan of more of a traditional environment with just a manager, um, because I always had a real good relationship with my managers. I was always considered one of the best programmers where I worked at, and they always respected my work. But now with this, I'm not completely against sprints. I'm just saying it's very high stress. But a lot of times your manager might not have skill in development, and so one of the problems with that your manager is not a programmer, they're just a sprint master. One of the problems is that they don't know when you're working hard. They don't know when you've bust your butt. All they know is, I just need to push harder. I just need to push harder always. But sometimes when you've had your developers and they've really sacrificed a lot to get something done, sometimes it's time to say, you know what, you've done a good job. Let's take a break. Otherwise you're just going to burn them out. Because it's funny. I actually noticed that in my career when I worked as a developer, the harder I worked, the less respect and recognition I got. And not just I was trying to become popular. That's not what I'm saying. They didn't recognize the hard work. And then there was one year I was like, I'm just going to take it easy this year a little bit, which is, I'm not saying I was right, because they were just riding me so hard. And guess what? People respected me more when I was working less. And it just shows you that people, you have to have managers that understand their employees. And if you have a guy who's really busting it out, you need to recognize that so you don't burn him out. And if you
Yeah.
have guys that aren't working that hard, then you need to make sure you understand and be like, okay, you guys need to pick it up a little more. But but in order for a manager to do that, you have to have a manager who kind of has a good understanding, at least to some degree, of the technology, so he can recognize when someone's working hard. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't think of it that way, but wow, that sounds like sales. They would push salespeople to do the same thing. It's like you could perform amazing, then we'll just tack $2 million more on. You got to meet that quota, and then you got another 2 million because you've outperformed, right? You
Yeah.
stack 2 million more on. It's just wild. I was like, wait, I just met my goal. Now you're stacking me more. You're stacking me more, and I get you want performance and you want to push me, but come on, guys, where does it end? Because we're just
I'll,
filling your revenue stream like so high.
I have a good analogy of this, and there's something I realize that's built into people that a lot of times when I actually did a post on this on my LinkedIn. I call it the golden goose, and it's one of my first posts on my LinkedIn, and it kind of has a picture of a goose laying golden eggs, and it has a picture of a guy. It was AI generated. It has a picture of a guy saying, "You better lay more golden eggs, or you're out of here." And I've
Yeah,
realized that there's something built into us that when we have, like, say, three employees, right? And this is why I just don't think managers understand this. We have one who's kind of productive, we have one who's not productive, we have one who's really productive, who delivers every time. And so we get used to keep going to that same guy. Okay, he delivered last time, so let's give him more work, and let's give him more work, and let's give him more work. For some reason, we continue to keep pushing our highest performers until we burn them out.
yeah,
But you should be like, enjoy the golden egg. It's like, okay, you should be pushing the other. We should be pushing the other guys a little more, but you don't do that because you didn't get results from the other guys. And instead of doing what you should do as a manager, you push the one guy who's delivering until you get him to quit, if that makes
yep,
sense. And that's
yep.
kind of like what you see in sales. So it's like, I think, there's this saying that we can always do better. We can always do better. But sometimes just for the mental health of your employees, you need to say, these guys killed it this last quarter. Let's give them a break. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Let's give them a break and tell them they did a good job, and not just throw a bunch of extra stress on them. Because, like I say, if you just keep burning out your employees, they'll leave. And
Hey,
companies need to realize that. Yeah, sorry.
oh no, no. Companies realize. Well, I was gonna say like the the struggle is because now a lot of man, we're going down a long rabbit hole. But I was thinking to myself is board of directors is what I was thinking, fulfilling the shareholders, driving
Yeah,
revenue, giving them dividends, making money. Everyone's just pushing to make more revenue, more revenue, more revenue, more profits, more profits. But they're running such a high debt too at the same time now with
yeah.
these companies. It's wild, kind of what's going on. But anyway,
Well, it's kind of like, you have to understand that maybe a startup can get away with that because they don't. But as a company gets bigger, sometimes you need your employees to stay because people don't realize the amount they have invested in an employee. There's something that you get that's called tribal knowledge. You eventually get employees in your company that have tribal knowledge that it takes years to develop.
yep.
There was my manager at BMA. He had worked there for like 30 years, and he knew just every part of the system. So,
Yeah, it really impacts their revenue and stuff like that. And I know we kind
yep,
of shifted around to a bunch of different things, but I think today's conversation was really about entrepreneurship, the future
yep,
of software development and AI coming into play. There's a lot of revolution. I mean, and kind of our industries, all the industries now. But it's
yep,
it's how we leverage the AI, how we use the AI. You can really disrupt a lot of markets right now and fill a lot of
yep,
gaps of automation, for example. So being a startup entrepreneur is probably the best place to be right now because you can provide a very valuable, intuitive solution at a lower price because of AI helping build things faster than someone that traditionally built it at a higher, much, much higher
yeah.
cost, right? They invested millions of dollars into their software where you can now come in, build something for a couple hundred grand and driven by AI, and it could just disrupt the massive $1 billion market. I mean, look at it. That's the way it could be.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the points I was making with my post on the STEM. It's like, yeah, you can still go into computer science and have a good career if you understand what you're going into, and you understand some of the other skills you got to develop in order to succeed.
Yeah.
It's like you got to, like, I think one especially in computer science, there's a misconception of those who have been successful in computer science. They think like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates are just these nerdy people. And I would say that they're probably less nerdy than the average college quarterback. And I stand by that. Because they go out there and they make friends with people across the world. That's not a nerdy
Yeah.
thing to do. They're actually far more social. Maybe they might look bad on camera occasionally, but they're far more social than probably the average college quarterback. And I seriously mean that. Like you look at Elon Musk. He's always at some sort of social gathering and party. You see him if you look at his pictures in a tuxedo, meeting people, pressing flesh. You know what I'm saying? That's just a word for shaking hands. Um,
Yeah.
but 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 and it's the same with all of these entrepreneurs. Bill Gates knows the most powerful people in the world, and whether you like these people or not, this conception that they're just nerds is false. They are not
Yeah.
nerds. And if you're
Definitely
going
not.
to go and if you're going to go into technology, you need to have an understanding that nerds don't succeed in technology unless they're lucky, like I would say, kind of like a Wozniak. If you happen to get paired up with that one guy who recognizes you, and you have that other side who can do the Steve Jobs side, then you'll be fine. But most people aren't going to be lucky enough to get paired to a Steve Jobs because Steve Jobs was not necessarily so much as a tech guy as he was an entrepreneur. And he was,
Yeah.
and like I said, these people, I don't consider them nerds. Like Mark Zuckerberg's is studying, was he studying like MMA now? That's not necessarily a
Yeah.
nerdy thing. I just think we have a misconception of these people who succeed in tech.
Definitely not. And you can
Yeah,
leverage social media and those gatherings now to build brands so fast and to get out your message so much faster now with
yeah,
going to those events and social media. So it's a combination of things. But you're right. I mean, I got to wrap this up, Lauren. But
yeah.
I think this was a great conversation to get started, and I think we could have many, many more. Um, but how can people get a hold of you? Is there any certain thing you want to share, like as far as contact information?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. If they wanted to send me a
Okay.
post, they can try to connect to me. Um, they can try to send me an email. I wasn't necessarily, like I said, I'm not necessarily running a huge
Oh,
business.
LinkedIn.
I tried doing a little bit of recruiting a little while ago. If you want someone to help interview engineers, I guess you can go to my website staffingengineer.com, and we could work something out. But like I said, right now
Yeah.
I'm mostly working on my own stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so if someone wants to reach out to me, they can just try to connect to me on LinkedIn or send me or fill out that form on that website.
Well, that sounds good, man. I'm going to edit this podcast. I truly
Yeah,
appreciate you joining me on the episode, and look forward to getting it out there soon. And just I mean, look, it's a matter of that's the cool thing about freedom of podcasting now. It's like getting
yeah,
out the message, having conversations like this, and look, love it or hate it. There's going to be people who love it. There's going to be people who hate it. That's just
yeah,
life, right? I mean, it's just the way it goes. We're not going to make friends with everybody. We'd love to make friends with everybody. We think everybody's cool, but it's
yeah,
just the way the world is sometimes. We're not going to agree with everybody, and our opinion's our opinion, and that's the way it is. So that's the greatest thing about this country. You can have that without prosecution, which is the best. Well, at least I hope it's not that way. Anyway,
yeah. Thank you.
so yeah, thanks, Martin. Do you have anything else you want to finish and wrap up with?
No, just one more thing actually. I would say like on that still STEM posts I've done on LinkedIn. Um, don't be too fooled by what you see in the public arena. Like most of the comments are just completely against me when it comes publicly, the publicly posted comments. But I'm getting private messages from people that are far more willing to agree with me, but they don't want to ruin their career. I even had one guy who did a post that was negative about what I was saying, and then deleted it, and then DM'd me and say, "Yeah, I actually agree with you, but I'm looking for a job, and I can't afford it to hurt my career." So people think that if you look at LinkedIn, you got to realize these people who are commenting on there are doing it with the idea of an employer looking at it. So very few people are. I'm sure it's still probably most of them are probably legitimate in how they feel, but there's a lot of people who are resonating with what I'm saying. You just don't see it on the posts, if that makes
You
sense.
won't. You won't. No. And I
Yeah,
did this a couple years ago when I started a podcast, and I did a live event, and it was a very disruptive conversation we were having, and a lot of the engineers were voicing their frustration on the comments, but then in the back end they were messaging me, man, hey man, I totally agree with what you're saying. I love the cause. Just keep up the good work. And I'm like, dude, this is where we need to all combine together to change things, man. You can't just hide and just not
yeah,
want to put your opinion out there because you're afraid. We got to make change, and the only way to make change is but all combining together and making a voice happen so
yeah,
you can make that change. It's wild. I'm like,
yeah,
guys, I get it. I'll be that guy that's
yeah.
outspoken and speaking about these things, but you need to support me and not just bash me in the comments constantly. So anyway, I'm with you, man. Totally with you. So more than happy to help you, Lauren, in anything that comes up, man. Thank you
Okay.
so much for joining the podcast, and look forward to the next conversation, man.
All right. Thank you so much. You take care.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Infrastructure Network.